Welcome to the January 22nd CNAB development meeting. We have an agenda which we work on throughout the week that is posted in Slack. And so we will just kind of incrementally work our way through the agenda today. So with that, the first item on the agenda was to finish up getting Sylvan's core maintainer status solidified because we had a PR that we missed, and that is now done. So the second item on the list is CNAB spec issue pull request 309, the claims fields, and we can actually just go maybe on this one, just do a longer discussion about anything related to claims and knock all that out in one big go round. So let's see. So 309 claims have been around for quite a while, but when I wrote the first draft of the spec, did not do a very good job at all of formalizing the fields on there. So I opened up a PR that attempts to formalize all of the field definitions. Let's see. Looks like for the most part, there's a little bit of discussion that's happened on here. But is there, what did you put it on here for?
I'd say there are a couple of comments that are, so first of all, this, who gets to set the underway status, if that is something intended to be set by tools whenever there's something in operation that's going to take a while, or something that's not going to finish. It seems to me at least unclear from the status who should set the underway status.
I think maybe it would be useful to talk about storing state in claims first, because that kind of might clarify whether we need to have the underway status in the claim at all.
Yeah, okay. So when you're talking about state, you're talking primarily about state as captured by the internal tooling in a bundle and stored in the claim, or yeah. Okay.
So the outputs of the invocation, the results, whether it was successful or failed, whether it's underway. I think that's pretty much it.
I think we have two different things when we say state. So like all the Microsoft people here, when we've been using the term state, we actually don't mean that. So I apologize for using that word. We've been wanting to store additional information that is opaque to people outside of the bundle. It's just extra information that we'd like to use when we go back into the bundle and execute the next time. So this could be, for example, Terraform state that we didn't want to store in the cloud. It could be unique information that, for example, Azure needed. It's basically anything the individual tooling needed, but for some reason we weren't able to rely 100% on storing it external somewhere else. So it was helpful for us in order to just jump back into the next action to be able to store some information, not in the claim, but next to the claim somewhere. We needed additional information when we execute the bundle again.
Yeah, Terraform state is a really good use case, actually. I think I've been thinking about having the runtime mount the outputs of the last invocation of the action the next time it's run, so that they're accessible. Then you would be able to continuously mutate state by changing the outputs and then have them mounted for the next invocation. That might be a modification to the outputs part of the spec, but keep the, and then allow us to have arbitrary sizes of files without having to put everything into the claim, which might need to be more efficient to pass around.
So
Yeah.
the custom field was originally how I had assumed this stuff would be treated. In fact, my first Terraform ones all used the custom field to store the Terraform state, but we could use it for other things as well. But so we've got the outputs and the result field, right? Outputs should be able to handle a lot of that stuff. Do we need to bake external file references into the spec, or how cross-platform do we anticipate the needs for this particular feature would be? Because if we need to bake in something in the spec that says a claim can reference some other stored asset somewhere, there will of course be some security implications to allowing claims to do that. Do we want to allow that to be something that individual runtimes can choose to do, or do we want to make that part of the standard?
So if we think about how we store data today, the backing store could be Mongo, it could be on a file system, it could be an S3, it could, you know what I mean? It could be many things. It would be nice if there was some way to just say claims have something that sits next to them where we can store additional data, and we could just name it and say it goes there, and it's up to the backing store to say where they put it.
So basically, like, are we treating this like a cache or like a just regular, like, opaque object storage?
This opaque object storage. So that if the backend store was a file system, it could just choose to put outputs in a directory or just on the file system next to it. If it was Mongo, it could choose to just, put it in another key next to it. If it was, you know what I mean? Like, it could just choose what's appropriate based off the backing store, as opposed to like the spec having to come up with something more strict.
Yeah, I definitely would like that more than going the route of saying, if you get a file path, this is how you resolve it.
Yeah.
The assumption is going to be that whatever runtime is going to receive that claim, that it knows how to mount whatever file storage that
right. But if
points
it's
to.
just a named key, and you basically treat local storage as a key value pair, where the value is stored on disk or stored in a database or stored somewhere like that.
I guess whenever we're going to formalize this, to make the clear distinction between cache being something that, I can live without and I can complete my operation without, and something that is required for me to finish the operation.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that this may be something that we would, the runtime wouldn't know. Sorry, let me put my thoughts back together again. Just like the runtime doesn't interact with the backing store that is Mongo, or it happens to be the file system, or it's S3 or something. This is something that the CNAB Go or something already handled, hydrated, and then gave to the runtime. Wouldn't we do the same if we had split it out into two things? And as a spec, we decide, do we always give you the claim and the output? And then maybe we should be focusing more on that. Just, do we always give you the data, or do we make it optional? Can you ask for the data, or something like along those lines, instead of worrying about how to get at it at the runtime level, perhaps? Does that make sense? Sorry. Let's keep the data access pattern that we currently have with claims, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I'm listening to all this, and I'm wondering if our current objective is to share this state storage behavior relative to claims for every tool, so that every tool might have the possibility of getting at it and using it, then it makes sense to be formally stated in some way. But if our sense is that the spec should make it possible for tools to do this, and then allow solutions to settle out for some revision of the spec in the future, then I'm trying to figure out, is there an argument for why Matt's original assumption that it would be custom would be the way that you might do this?
Audio is breaking up, Paul.
I couldn't understand what you said, Ralph. I'm sorry. It was dropping like every other word.
Oh,
I love it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's a miracle. Imagine that. So if you can hear me, and do throw a hand up if you cannot. What I was suggesting was that the way I'm hearing the conversation implies that we're trying to find a way in the spec to enable more tools to intelligently understand where and how to load the state that might be associated with the claim. And my question is, it sure seems to me that pushing to do that is noble, but it's functionally speaking going to end up to the underlying implementation and to the tool to understand how to go ahead and mount that storage facility, whatever it might be. And so I'm trying to wonder, is there a real purpose to not letting tools do this for custom, as Matt had originally thought, as opposed to trying to put some more structure around it in the spec at this time? What would we accomplish? What is the feature for all the tools that we would be enabling that right now in custom would just be an individual tool would have to understand what some custom field needed to, what that behavior needed to be?
yeah. So, and I think another way to say it would be, is what we're after then coming up with a generic input spec of saying on follow-on operations like upgrade and such, do we have a particular pattern that every installation of CNAB can rely upon, or are we trying to make a more general or generic solution that in the end is just going to require every runtime and or every bundle to treat it however they desire to treat it? Is that right, Ralph?
Yeah, I think that I'm just hearing the desire to think through the problem for every. If it were in the spec, then that means every tool has the confidence of understanding a specific way of doing it. But of course, they still have to implement it. Some of these things are potentially optional and so on. Whereas if it's in a custom field, and some tool does it, say Docker app does it, any other tool can still understand how Docker app did it and implement that particular method of doing it. And yet we haven't had to sit and figure out right now what's the best way to do this. I'm wondering whether the problem space is sufficiently simple that we could do it in the spec right now and make a reasonably good choice, or whether it's one of those things where just being public about how you do it for various tools allows us to iterate until we get to the point where we could say, no, we understand how this probably should be done in spec.
Yeah, okay.
Don't know.
So is the output spec as it is now sufficient to capture, other than size of a lot of these assets, is the way the output spec works now sufficient to capture stuff like Terraform state and then be able to get it later? Is there anything other than the size of the stored artifacts that makes outputs insufficient for what we're talking about today?
So I think I would be in favor, and I've been meaning to create a formal proposal for this, but what I'm thinking is that we could add to the outputs part of the spec just a field to say that this output should be mounted on upgrade. And then the runtime would be responsible for handling that. And that would allow invocation images to mutate their own state without having relying on user input to pass state back in. Because that's what claims are in my mind. It's they're surfaced, they're brought in, they should be treated to some degree as kind of untrusted input. So putting state in there that then can be modified externally seems a little bit tricky. So for that reason, I think like that would also potentially be a pretty small change to make to the outputs part of the spec. Obviously, it puts a lot of onus on the runtime to implement that well. But we could also avoid some problems with, like, if we assume that outputs may be multi-gigabyte files for some use cases, then if runtimes are not required to include them in a claim after completing an operation, like, we're avoiding a lot of oversending of data. If we just, I think one workaround for now is just to say in the spec that a compliant runtime should have some method for retrieving outputs on demand for a given revision. But the number of revisions back is up to the implementation and things like that, and the actual methodology for fetching the output is up to the runtime. For now, I think that's something we could still formalize in the future. But
Yeah, so to summarize then, on the output spec, adding a mount path there means that then we have a good way of communicating from install to upgrade and so on. Here's the output of the install on upgrade, put it here. Here's the output of upgrade 1, put it here for upgrade 2. That I think is a great idea. I think that would be.
yeah.
Carolyn, does that actually have any of your use cases, by the way?
Sorry, what's that?
I need to think about this a bit. I can definitely say for sure that we're not just interested in upgrade, especially for Azure. Like, we need certain state information for custom actions and for uninstall. So we may need it for all of them. I had a follow-up question though, which was that in order to do this like mounting, like right now, the claim changes that Matt has is talking about always mounting the claim inside the bundle, and outputs are inside of the claim. So with Jacob's suggestion, would that say that outputs wouldn't be inside the claim? Because otherwise they are always mounted.
Correct. The outputs would not be inside the claim. It would be up to the runtime to store them somehow and then mount them.
So they would the runtime would strip it out of the claim and then only sometimes mount it in this other location.
Outputs wouldn't be part of the claim at all.
At all.
Right. Your runtime could be backed by S3 or something, but it would store outputs after an invocation executes, and then mount them again, retrieve them and mount them the next time you run an action.
So we would need something else that just says, how do we get claims, or how do we get outputs out of a bundle? Because right now, the way we get outputs out of a bundle is because the claim was persisted.
Is that in the spec already? Or I guess it's just not formalized, right?
It kind of was in, and then we changed things a bit, and then it kind of went out. I don't know. I just want to make sure that part's firm so that we don't lose it. I don't know. Vaughn can kind of speak more to this. He implemented it all in Porter and a bunch in CNAB Go too. Vaughn, you know how we used to have a mount that we would bring into CNAB Go, and that's where all the outputs would go? And I don't really remember. Is that part of the spec or?
Yeah, it's kind of mentioned, at least the spec today is outputs are stored in the claim, and Porter knows how to read the claim to fetch those from the previous action. Way back in the day, before this evolved in the spec, Porter had its own local outputs directory. So all of the outputs would persist regardless of number of actions traversed. But I think, Carolyn, as your point, maybe making sure that we still allow users to see outputs between actions, not just the runtime to access and modify.
Yeah, just make sure that the spec has a clear way of saying, how do we persist outputs at the end of the bundle running? And then how do we commonly get at them? You know, how are they saved? Because we have that CRUD util, right? that stores the claim, like how are we storing then outputs in a common way for everything? Like, how does the spec handle that?
Yeah, again, I'm thinking about use cases where we've got very large outputs.
Yeah, I am too. I just want to make sure that we like, if we rewrite this and we rewrite the spec, that we just make sure that we get all that covered. That's all.
Can somebody other than me volunteer to write up a proposal for that part of the spec? I'm afraid I won't do a terribly great job of synthesizing what everybody just said here.
I can write a proposal for having like outputs mounted as.
Okay.
I think we can have something similar to apply to handle custom actions as well, and be able to be selective about when we need to mount things. But yeah,
Okay.
I can.
Do you want me to mention anything about state being outputs? Because that was something we mentioned at the beginning. Or should we just leave that alone? As like a non-normative recommendation, basically, for putting things.
All right, can you repeat that? I got confused.
One of the things that we've been talking about is where we put state, like Azure makes a bunch of VMs and it has IDs, or Terraform has its entire Terraform state.
Right.
And we didn't want to put it in Terraform Cloud. We wanted to maybe persist it with the bundle. One suggestion that came up in this discussion was put it in an output that we could then just reload with the bundle.
Yeah.
Could that be a non-normative thing to just say, we suggest you put it in an output?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can make it non-normative, or we can even remain totally silent on it, depending on what you would prefer. But yeah.
I mean, I feel like a lot of people have asked for guidance on this. Like when I talk to people, every author asks about this.
Okay, yeah, then we could definitely put that in the spec. I wasn't sure if you were trying to make sure we don't make it normative and force everybody to do that, or if you just wanted some non-normative guidance. We can definitely do it as guidance.
I mean, Ralph, you yell if you don't like that, but I'd love to have just some idea that we can just start trying and going with, and
yeah,
prove out and then tell people that's the best practice. Okay, cool. I'll put that in as non-normative then.
Okay. So does that then give any assistance, Jacob, on answering the what we want to do with the status underway?
Yeah, so I think that's fine. I did want to raise another use case with not having statuses and claims at all, which is that you can like safely, once you remove that, then you basically have only an object that contains the inputs to run an action, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got the bundle, the action, parameters. You're only missing credentials, obviously, but at that point, you can take a checksum of the claim object and use it in various ways, like building an index of claims, or so like if you're implementing the Kubernetes driver, you might want to check if there's already a job running for that same claim. So you could easily handle that by taking the checksum of the claim and then using that as a label selector for existing jobs, and then connect the user to the logs of the already running job if you've got multiple acting on the same claim. But if you have what I'm calling state, or like an underway status or something in that claim, then that complicates things because you need to remove that field first, at the very least. But yeah, you would have to sanitize the object before doing anything like that, which is not the end of the world, but it's a use case to think about, potentially having that sort of state represented alongside the claim instead of embedded within it.
And then if the status field was removed from the claim, where would you keep the fact that an operation is running, or that it fails, or that it completed successfully?
That'd be implemented by the runtime. So like if you take Porter, for example, you would get the status via CLI output, right? If
Yeah.
it's a API, then you get a status code back. I think it might be useful to formalize a definition of what that looks like. So we could pass around a well-known object, just like a claim.
Yeah, I actually agree with this strictly on grounds that injecting status into this whole object is kind of, they're not the same, they're not operating at the same level of abstraction, right? So
Yeah.
it's got the Kubernetes API is you constantly have state data mixed up with configuration data and stuff like that. And it's really, you can't just hash a Kubernetes object because state data changes frequently, even if all the rest of the meaningful data is the same, at least after. So I would be okay with moving that. And it's really just, I mean, we could either move the entire result field out into a separate object, or just remove status from there and say it's up to the runtime to figure out how to manage that. I'd be okay with either, really.
So it'd be really helpful. Okay, let me explain my evil plans. So I have this project that I started prototyping a while ago, and I have a group of students actually working on this as their semester project. It's a CNAB dashboard that can read claims from any one of our tools and display a beautiful list, like a status board that you can put up on TV that shows you what your whole department or whatever has been doing with bundles. So it can show how many you've installed, failure rates, the names of bundles you've installed, like what tools you've been using, what mix-ins in the case of Porter, which, like, are there bundles currently executing right now, which is why I'm keenly interested in some way of underway, things like that. So it'd be really useful to not offload too much and just say the runtime. It'd be great to have a split and say part of the claim is just declarative and it doesn't contain state, but there's still some spec that says, and this is a way to have an audit trail of what's happened so that we can still inspect and get a feel for, like, this is what we've done, to be able to mine this information, and I think still provide a lot of value across our tools. Just selfishly, I think that'd be useful to people. I mean, if not, it'll just happen in Porterland, but I'd hate for that to happen.
What if we had an installation object that embedded a claim and also had that state?
Yeah, it just, like, if it's separate and then there's still some way for us to find it and it's just part of the spec, that'd be great. That's all I'm trying to say. It doesn't have to be, I'd rather it not be inside the claim. I think being able to index claims and have it be consistent would be good. It's worth doing.
And even
I'm just saying, whenever we push stuff off to, like, individual tools to solve, that's harder, that's all. But yeah, for the underway stuff, I still think, at least the other part I was going to say for Porter, at least, Porter's working on putting claims in shared places where multiple instances of Porter tools and even Docker app and Duffel can look at those locations and then be able to access them. So it's just having underway actually is kind of useful, but we're actually starting to look at using other mechanisms that these storage mechanisms give us to be able to lock them so that we know that they're being used and we don't accidentally try to, like, double execute an upgrade and things like that on a bundle at the same time. I don't know if that's spec worthy, but I find just underway almost may not be sufficient, to be honest. Yeah, I know, Ralph, you totally called it. Yeah.
All right, so on this particular PR, can we get the changes merged and then you do a follow-up PR for a better way of doing the outputs and storing objects, and then a follow-up PR for an alternative to the result field on this?
like splitting it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And figuring out exactly how we relate a claim to an audit log or an audit object or whatever you want to call that.
I can do the audit one. How about that?
And then Jacob already volunteered to do the output one.
Yeah.
I haven't picked up any new, other than finishing this particular PR. Okay.
If we merge as is, can we still go back and make breaking changes to the claim object?
Yeah. We're not worried about freezing up this part of the spec
Got
yet.
it.
I think we have plenty of time before we have to start freezing that. Okay. Okay, so are we good enough to move on to anything else on claims before we move on to content digest stuff?
No.
All right.
This is a decades-old question, and yeah, neither Jeremy or
yeah, who are the main ones discussing? Oh,
Jeremy
Glenn and Jeremy.
yeah.
So maybe we'll skip this one, unless anybody has anything to say on issue 287. I'll give people a second to take a look. But I think they've been going back and forth on that. Okay, silence means move along. Mounting the previous bundle on upgrade, which is spec issue 296. So the idea on this one was currently we mount on an upgrade, we mount only the claim that was saved the last time. The discussion has been, should we also mount a current working claim in that runtime, or is that confusing, or is that necessary? So, and I think Carolyn had asked for mounting the in-progress claim, and Sylvan agreed that that would be useful for what they're doing, right?
I didn't manage to speak to Sylvain before because I saw he put things on the agenda, but I didn't get a chance to ask him exactly what he was thinking.
Yeah, I can see this being very useful, especially for like a atomic upgrade type use case where you want to be able to roll back to the last revision.
One question I have then is, do we say the last revision failed? Do we give all the last failed revisions plus the last successful one, or how do we do it? Or all of them ever? Yeah, maybe we need to go through a couple of different use cases and see how that pans out.
Revisions are ULIDs, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking maybe we could have just a directory of like revision name claim.json maybe, and then we'd also need a way have that status object to tell us what the status of each revision was, and then we could mount in revisions back.
Yeah, and then you'd be able to sort and walk backward until you found the last successful one, or you found the third failure from the end, or whatever it was you were.
Right.
Carolyn, did you want to say anything about the original intent you had with this one and what you're...
Yeah, I think you were confused. I only just wanted the original claim with the outputs, so I could get it outputs from the last action. That was it. It was just for the state stuff from before, so that if we installed something interesting during install, during upgrade, I could get at that and then keep working with the same resources that were created during install.
Oh, and that already now is part of the spec.
Yeah, I mean that's what we were working on just a minute ago. Yep.
Okay.
And what is a scenario where I would want to select a specific claim other than the last one or other than the last successful one? Do we actually need to mount other revisions than the last successful one? trying to think of a scenario where my runtime would need to pick the end failure of an execution.
You may want to see the history of like which actions were invoked, like custom actions, potentially.
Yeah, maybe we should go for the first version, go with the simple one, and then see if we do have a need for that.
Yeah.
And go in the simple one, last successful claim instead of last claim.
We also already have the CNAB previous revision environment variable, don't we?
Yes, you do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just trying to understand whether there's an actual need right now, or we're just planning for someone will feel that runtimes or bundle authors will need in the future rather than a current need. I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now that I understand what you were asking for, that's not as I was
I
making.
see Sylvain he actually brought up the it must be the last successful claim. So I'm busy reading back the GitHub history without having read it.
Yeah. No, I think I was making that out to be more complicated than what everybody was actually asking for. So I apologize.
I just need the last successful claim.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for the base case. And if we do end up with other cases, then we can look at those and see if that makes sense to add. I do like the idea of being able to access all of them. I just am not sure if that's necessary for now.
It's the last successful claim that for an action install, upgrade, or remove, right? Not one of the other ones. Because if you just get like a status or something like that that didn't actually make any changes to the thing, that probably wouldn't be useful either. So it's only the ones that change the state.
Right. Yeah. And we changed so the spec now says that you must not create a new claim for any action that doesn't mutate the object.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Or mutate the release. So that actually ends up being fairly simple. It really does end up being last successful claim is the.
Can I run one scenario past maybe Ralph if he's still on? If you had, for example, a upgrade and you ran through it and it got halfway through and it was actually modifying resources from the bundle and then it failed, and then you would try to just run that upgrade again, but at that point it's actually had done a bunch of things and maybe created some of your outputs but not all of them, you know what I mean? It got halfway through and maybe it done some things and then you tried to rerun upgrade again. We wouldn't give you that claim with that state because it had failed, right?
Right.
But it actually did have useful potential state and outputs in it that would have helped you continue from where you left off or potentially revert, roll back, or clean up what you had just done in that failed run. Is that useful to think about as part of this?
Yeah, I mean, for example, the ability to pick up from a known position halfway through, like think about how this is going to play out as we go forward. Like right now, the ecosystem is starting; it's becoming useful for people and so forth. And as soon as they realize en masse, how useful it is, the first thing they're going to do is create longer and longer pipelines. That is, they're going to bundle together more and more things because it's going to be useful. Once they do that, they're going to immediately sit there and go, hey, not only did I change state, but I also wasted 15 minutes of my life. And I'm going to want to pick up, after that 15 minutes, because I should have been tracking what got done. And so the kind of demonstration that Terraform had by stashing the state file outside of the in the S3 bucket that the DigitalOcean bundle demonstrated is the kind of functionality that people are going to want. So how we get there will become more and more important in the use case, especially in scale out, large scale environments with more and more complex applications. It'll become a thing, even though it's a pain in the. He stopped talking. in order not to use 4-letter words. So yeah, it's a scenario.
Yeah, I don't know if we have to deal with it.
The way I look at it though, oh, go ahead.
I don't know if we have to deal with it or if that's
Go ahead.
something bundle authors need to deal with better inside their actions. But I mean, I know it's a problem.
Yeah, that's entirely.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't think it's at all a problem that's insurmountable in the bundle case, right? Like for example, if I had to weigh that functionality, if I had a way to, let's say I can speak in Porter terms, if there were a mix-in or a plugin that basically stashed, current execution state in the way that we're talking, the material that we're talking about necessary to resuscitate claim state, 2/3 of the way through a run that ultimately fails. If there were a plugin or a way that a tool could do that for the user would not care that it was not in the spec, for anything different than it currently is, right? So when you talk about the use case, yeah, it's important. But when you talk about the where is it solved case, no, a bundle solution or a tool solution is totally fine.
Okay.
I mean, it is a pretty advanced scenario. It's hard to do that well.
It's advanced, and yet I gotta be honest, like we all kind of probably have rerun an upgrade when it failed. So it's probably something that every single person hits. It's advanced, but it's common.
Oh, I completely agree. I agree. And I think that at this stage in the ecosystem, functionally speaking, most people using bundles are developers. There are people either interested in the ecosystem, they're trying out new things, they're trying to expand the repertoire of skills that they have with the tooling. But as soon as that becomes a scale thing, as it gets outside pure developers and gets into bundle creators and a lot of bundle users, boy, is rerunning going to be a thing. And, even losing 15 minutes each time we run, right, is going to be quickly a huge pain. And so if you don't think about it in terms of state, which is one thing, in terms of like creating new resources. Yeah, I created new resources. I mutated the actual configuration of artifacts. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is just lost time, right? And so there's two reasons why that's going to be even more important, and that a lot of people are going to hit it. So I do think it's important. I guess if you ask me how I thought about it, I would say that it's probably possible to push off a solution for a while and let tools do it. But in the bundle, like you had suggested, I think that's probably fine. Okay. But if there's a solution that we could identify, even if it were a hard one, I would definitely agree that we should, put a PR on that one. So that we could work forward with it. Potentially, if we could solve it for everybody, that would be a great thing to do, or at least to solve it in the spec or to formulate how that should behave. That would be a tremendous step forward. But there you go. Yeah, I guess I agree for now. Maybe tools solve it maybe more creatively if they have the leeway to do so. But I don't see like an easy way. So I guess less successful. No, yeah, it's it's a thing that has to be done to be useful for what we're trying to do. It's a thing that has to be done by tools to be useful at scale in the future. Like that, that use case is very clear. The question is whether in the shorter term, over the next month or two, is there a way we could specify a framework in the spec by which tools could do this without getting too restrictive? Something to think about. Yeah. Thank you for letting me go off on that tangent, everyone.
All right, so we had issue 312 we covered already. That was storing claims when an action has state, and I think we covered that in the claims discussion. I added one more item. So Chris and I had our meeting, CNAB director meeting, and one of the things we wanted to review was the changes that have come in on the CNAB Core spec. and whether they constituted an errata release of the spec or a patch release of the spec. And the guidelines turned out to be remarkably clear, and we determined that it qualifies as a patch release of the spec. So we need to decide, the current master, we need to decide if we want to ratify that as CNAB Core 1.0.1. It just has a handful of small fixes and clarifications that were not in the original spec. Nothing, we didn't find anything in there that would break existing implementations, but we did find things in there that were actually beyond how we defined an erratum item when we did the original version of the spec. So if nobody objects or wants us to delay, we will open up PR to release version 1.0.1 of the CNAB Core spec. Did I get that all right, Chris? Okay.
Just to give one piece of context, we want to be careful with the errata and keep them really just for spelling mistakes and things like that. So rather put out a new version than start debating what errata are. Yeah. That's a black hole I don't want to go into.
We do well debating on other things already. We don't need to introduce more. Yeah.
So is there any other PR than 305, the one that indicate both parameters and credentials may inject files that changed core?
The other one was actually a little embarrassing. When we tagged the 1.0.0 release, we in that tag had everything marked as 1.0.0-WD.
Oh, yeah.
And again, both of those did not pass the errata test, which was, are they spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes? And if they're not, then they require a patch release. So we'll open an issue for that, and I think we need a super majority of 2/3 to pass that, which I don't think will be a problem in this case.
And other than opening the PR and tagging master with 101, is there anything other procedural thing that we have to do for this?
Yeah, we just have to vote on that issue and cut it, and that's it.
Okay. And we can vote on the pull request, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to give any update on the security stuff? Trishank's not on.
No, Trishank's not on. We have a meeting in 8 minutes about that.
Okay.
So not really.
I know with you guys are getting close to merging.
Yes.
You all are getting close to merging.
Yeah, and this is the other thing that I wanted to bring up. We briefly talked about it last week during the security and registry meeting about when something gets merged into master. It's the same thing with the claims and outputs. It's not final, it's just a draft, right? So I'd rather have something in master that people can look at rather than the things being in pull requests that are not that visible to everybody else. I'd rather have people shouting that, oh, this is not working for us.
Yeah.
While it's in draft state rather than merging and tagging it as stable immediately. Yeah. So yeah. I think we're going to go ahead and leave everyone this week to review again the 300 PRs and then merge them as draft into master. Would that be okay with people? I think the question is the conceptual thing of having things in master that are still in draft, which I think we do have right now anyway with claims.
We've actually always done it that way.
Yeah.
And I too am reluctant to try and do that thing where you merge a bunch of branches and then immediately stamp it, because you miss things when you're context shifting between branches and don't read it as an entire document. So
yeah, so just wanted to, it's still going to be in draft, but it's going to be merged in couple of weeks.
All right, anybody else have last minute items you want to add to the agenda? Otherwise we will end a couple of minutes early.
Just an update on the CNAB to OCI, moving to the CNAB.io org. It's in progress. We're at the last hurdle now. There's a couple of commits that were not signed off with DCO, but they were done by people who have signed other waivers. So I'm just trying to see what we need to get done to make sure that that's not a problem. I don't think it's a problem, but I just want to make sure that the JDF are happy too.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that update. I forgot all about the last little hurdle there. All right, I think we'll wrap it up then today. Thank you very much. I know we've been a little bit heavy on the claim spec, but that is because that's the next spec we want to get merged in. So look for that CNAB Core 1.0.1 PR, and we'll try and get that kind of wrapped up by the time we meet in 2 weeks from now. Next week is security on this time slot next week. So if you're interested in that, feel free to join that call. All right. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.